So good morning, everyone. It's always very evil to be the person sitting between you and the food and the drinks and etc. So I'll make this very short and very fast. My name is Wildeboar. I'm Red Hat's EMEA evangelist, and I'm here not only to present Red Hat and other things, but mainly to make sure the thinking changes a little bit. So Wildeboar is a very old Dutch name. I'm Dutch. I live in Munich, but I'm still Dutch. And Wildeboar is a type of farmer in the 16th century. In the 16th century, you had the nobility, and the nobility owned all the land in the Netherlands. And then you had the nobility who didn't take care of all the land. So you had people that said, you know, F you, I'm going to grow my wheat wherever I want. So they occupied the land and they started to grow wheat, and they were called the wild farmers, the Wildeboars. And that's where I come from, and now I work at Red Hat and I do open source, and it still feels the same. It's an old family tradition. And when we look at the FinTech industry, where the FinTech industry is very agile, very fast moving in those sectors that the nobility, the big banks leave behind and untended, you see the connection between all of this. It's all about being fast and doing it the right way. So the title of my presentation was not decided by me. I would never use something like that. It was someone else. If you don't know who Red Hat is, I'm going to make this very short. We are the leader in open source software worldwide. We have 11,000 people. We do $2 billion in revenue with selling free software, which is the weirdest proposition ever. But if we look at the market today, if we look at FinTech, if we look at banks, it's all running on open source. There's not a single company out here that does not use open source stuff, that does not use stuff where Red Hat is involved in any way with developing it. Everything runs on Linux, everything uses open source components, and a lot of the FinTech companies create new open source components. Why is this happening and why is this so relevant? It's because the market has fundamentally changed over the past 10 years. When we look at IT nowadays, IT is becoming software defined. Everything is software. Hardware becomes irrelevant and at the very outer fringes of the stack. Now in your stack, which is more or less software defined, I say that 80% of the components you have in a software stack for any given company or organization is completely non-competitive. Your secret sauce, your margin, your value is maybe 20% on top of it, not more. Now, if 80%, which is operating systems, databases, cloud, whatever, I don't really care, if 80% is non-competitive, it means we can share the knowledge there. We can work together without giving away competitive value or a competitive edge. We can create together working solutions for the vertical, and this is what we do at Red Hat. This is what we focus on. We try to bring the people together to create 80% solutions for everything. With that in mind, you start to understand why FinTech is such a relevant thing for us, because we see exactly this happening. We see old banking systems, very monolithic silos being breaking up into smaller modules, into smaller agile communities and companies working on these little parts, and together create the big solutions. This is what we as Red Hat see as very relevant for our business and where we have a lot to offer. Just a few numbers to keep your mind occupied. If you look outside the stock exchange markets on this planet, all of the stock exchange markets on this planet, 90% of them run on Linux. 75% of them run on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The stock exchange market, the heart of capitalism, runs on free software. This is the most ironic thing ever. I love it. I went to a bank in Switzerland years ago and they told me that open source is a communist, socialist thing and they will never use it. And now we're running their stock exchange systems. I came back to them last year and I said, you know, we win, you lose. And what this ultimately means is we now have a generation of developers that wants to change the world in the open source way, that wants to use these technologies to bring us all, to move us all forward. It's a mobile revolution, it's whatever new banking solutions we find, whatever new money things we find. You hear a lot of buzzwords here today, blockchain and cloud and DevOps and all of this stuff. At the heart of all of it is something that typically gets ignored or not really put in words, and that is open source. Without open source, none of this would be possible. All of the cloud vendors you have out there, except for Microsoft, but all of the other ones run on Linux and run on open source. All of the developers you have right now, the developers you get in the market, use open source methods and want to create open source. Again, this is not something that I'm just saying because I work at Red Hat. There's a company in the US called Black Duck, and they do a lot of research on the use of open source technologies. And they found out that 67% of the companies out there allow their developers to develop open source with the community, so outside of their company, during working hours. And when you ask these companies, why are you allowing your developers to work this way, the 80% reply is it's the only way to attract and retain top development talent. So open source is becoming the standard method of developing software. Doesn't mean everything is open source. It just means the methods, the working together, the forming of communities, the communication methods we have, the hardware and software systems we use are becoming commonplace everywhere. And this moves the stack. So in the past, we were at the bottom, we were doing Linux and we were doing middleware. Then we moved into cloud management and software-defined storage. And the next level we have now, which is extremely relevant for this audience, is API management. The new solutions you see, especially in the FinTech market, mostly consist about plugging stuff together in new ways and doing fancy stuff and revolutionary stuff by plugging stuff together. And this means we now have a lot of systems out there that maybe not even be our own systems. We cannot control them really, but we have to stick them together in a performant way so that our solutions work. And that's called API management. So after cloud, the next buzzword is API management. Red Hat has invested in that. There was a company called 3Scale that we bought recently, and we're now integrating it. And as we always do when we buy companies and as we buy products, we make them fully open source. So at Red Hat, the promise is always the same. Everything you get from us is open source, period, and there's no exception to that rule. So with API management and 3Scale, you can plug these things together in extremely flexible ways. You can take a lot of different providers, put them together, have a defined layer to control access, to limit access, to meter access, to organize the payment for the usage, and etc. All of this on open source. And that's the next level in the stack. Everybody's now talking about serverless computing, about how we get rid of machines. I'm not 100% convinced of that. To be honest, as an old open source guy, I'm still a developer myself. I hack a little bit at home. Home automation, it never works, but it's fun. Sometimes I come at home and instead of the lights going on, the music starts blaring and my neighbors get upset, but hey, this is how you develop. You learn by mistakes. With API management, we are getting this layer at the very top for everyone to access, and it's really important to take a look at it. I promised I would be very fast. I promised I would make sure you all get your food and drinks, so that's why I'm slowing down now. And I want to invite you not only to the food and drinks outside, but also to visit us at our booth, where we can discuss the influence of open source on the market and everything, but where we can also discuss about farming in the wild and building stuff the open source way. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the day and learn a lot.